Welcome, 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 everyone. Really great to see you here. Thank you so much for joining us for our webinar today. Our webinar is focused on building an anti-racist corporate culture. So if that's what you're looking for some tips, some ideas in which to do so, you are absolutely in the right place. Do feel free to say hi in the chat. Let us know where you are joining us from in the world. Are you in the UK, in the north of England, in the south of England, in the east, west? Are you in another country? We're always happy to hear from you wherever you are. So please do say hello. And definitely, we might even give you a shout out later on in the session if you do so. I'm based in sunny Hemel Hempstead today in Hertfordshire. There's no rain, so that's what I'm really happy about. It's not particularly sunny, but it's not awful either. So that's where I am, and we're all based in the UK. So I want to start by saying a big thank you on behalf of my social enterprise, Rocking Your Teens. Those of you who joined on Eventbrite might have given a little bit of a donation, and that donation will go towards increasing resilience, inspiring and raising aspirations in teenagers. In fact, we have a Girls in STEAM conference happening on the 18th of June, STEAM standing for science, technology, engineering, art and maths. So if you want to learn more about that, how you could sponsor a teen, how your organization could be involved, how you could contribute to our goodie bags, do get in touch. My colleague Tanya will be adding the URL into the chat. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jenny Garrett. I'm an award-winning career coach, author, and leadership trainer, and founder. And together with my team, we work to elevate diverse talent and foster inclusivity in organizations. My latest practical and empowering book is Equality versus Equity, Tackling Issues of Race in the Workplace. And I found out in the last 7 days, it's been shortlisted for Business Book of the Year award, which I'm absolutely delighted about. Again, I believe my colleague will add the link into the chat. So what are we talking about today? Well, according to a report by Pearn Kandola, 74.8% of respondents believe that racism is a problem in their workplace. Pause for a moment. Think about that. 3/4 of the people in organizations believe racism is a problem in the workplace. Um, Most people, around 59%, are not particularly comfortable with talking about racism at work. And over half the respondents witnessed racism in the workplace. And 28% of those people took no action whatsoever. These statistics paint a really troubling picture for us all. It means that the racism is present in our workplaces and that we're doing very little about it. And of course, that will have a knock-on effect on culture, on productivity, on retention of the people who are attracted to come to your organization. After all, many people do check Glassdoor now before they think that they choose the organization that they will work with. So in this webinar, we're going to help you think about how to initiate meaningful conversations about race at work, how you can start to challenge racist behaviors and systems, how you can begin to think about building a culture rooted in inclusivity and respect. I hope that's what you were looking for. I'm so delighted to be joined by Hira, Ngozi, Lisa, and Ishreen. They're all listed in the Diverse Executive Coaching Directory, a directory which connects corporate organization with coaches from the global majority, or you might say people who have an ethnically diverse background. And we'll be discussing how you can build an anti-racist corporate culture. You can find out more about the directory again from the link in the chat. We have a buzzing LinkedIn group that you can join, where we're always sharing really helpful information about our events, information to help you be the best you can be in terms of your EDI agenda. So how is this session going to run? Well, Hira, Ngozi, Lisa, and Ishreen will briefly introduce themselves. I'll start off by asking them some questions, and then we'll open it up to you for your questions and reflections. However, we'll keep an eye on the chat throughout. So if you're anything like me, you have a question, it's fleeting and it disappears from your mind. And at the time the questions come up, you can't remember what it was. So feel free to type it in the chat whenever it comes to you, and we'll come back to it when it is time for the Q&A. There is a hashtag for this event, and the hashtag is anti-racism. So do feel free to share and talk about some of the golden nuggets you get from this event. And also we'll put the tags in the chat for all of our speakers. However, you can see them on the LinkedIn event and see their tags there. So without further ado, I'm going to start with you, Hira. Please, can you introduce yourself?
Hi, thank you, Jenny. So I am an executive coach, a leadership development specialist, speaker, writer, author, also the founder of an organization called Advancing Your Potential, where we offer allyship programs and talent management initiatives. And finally, I am the award-winning author of 2 books, Her Way to the Top, A Guide to Smashing the Glass Ceiling, and Her Allies, a practical toolkit to help men lead through advocacy. And I'm glad to be here.
Thank you so much. And I can highly recommend both books. They're absolutely amazing. So yeah, if you haven't just jumped straight onto Amazon, I recommend that you do. Ngozi, please, can you introduce yourself?
How do you follow that? Well, I'll
You
try.
can do
My
it.
name, I'll try. My name's Ngozi Wala, and I am director and co-founder of Aurora, which is a culture change consultancy. And we are focused on empowering and enabling organizations to have positive mental well-being in their workplaces for everybody. And that obviously includes your employees from racially marginalized backgrounds. And this is something that's so important to me. So I'm delighted to be here to talk about how we can promote an anti-racist corporate culture.
Fabulous. Thank you. That sounds amazing. I love the sound of the work that you do. And Lisa.
Hello, I'm Lisa Leonce, and I'm an executive career and leadership coach. I also host and speak at events, consultant and trainer for individuals and businesses worldwide. I support professionals in their transitions from different roles and also in achieving their desired role that they'd like to be in. I design and deliver bespoke services for organisations so that they can improve and maintain effectiveness and also inclusivity. And I am able to talk about challenging topics in an informative and thought-provoking way. I'm the founder of eField Coaching and the co-founder of Shira Network, which also deals with diversity and inclusion.
Brilliant. And you've got an amazing podcast that I've been a guest on, which I really enjoyed.
Yes.
And so has Ngozi as well. Ngozi's won some awards for her podcast as well. So, well, yeah, do tune in.
Please.
Maybe we can put those links in the chat as well for your podcast. That would be a really good idea. Thank you. And last but most definitely not least, Ishreen.
Thank you so much, Jenny. Hello, everybody. My name's Ishreen Bradley, and my passion is that everyone has a fair crack at work. And that's led me to found my practice, which is called Belonging Pioneers. And I'm thrilled that our work has been recognized by various organizations, including the Hertfordshire Chamber of Commerce and the International Alliance of Women. And our work is really grounded in research, and we're researching currently the impact of privilege at work and what it looks like in future to have an equitable and inclusive culture at work. And, so what do I do in my work? I guide leaders and I guide teams through complex situations. How do you deal with them? How do you have some clarity, some some confidence and some courage to take action there. And my focus is really on culture. It's on how do you evolve the mindsets and the cultures that acknowledge valuable differences and that enable authentic leadership. So that's what I'm really passionate about. And we provide advisory, consulting, coaching, and training in those areas to help to create and implement spaces that evolve strategies and engage colleagues in a way that it's psychologically safe, in a way that everybody has a sense of connection, and in a way that delivers tangible value to the business.
Wonderful. Thank you for all the work you do. It's all amazing. And we really appreciate hearing about it. And I think it's clear from the way that you're speaking about it, the depth and the integrity in which you engage in your work, Ishreen. So thank you so much. I want to
I'm so sorry. I forgot to say, I also have a podcast. It's called The Privilege Eruption.
What could you repeat it? Because I think.
Yeah, it's called The Privilege Eruption.
The Privilege Eruption. Lovely, lovely. We'll make sure we get all of those links for those podcasts and Hera's books as well out to you. Thank you so much. And I also want to say a shout out to Pamela, who's in Hampshire, who's part of our audience today. Who's great that you've typed in the chat. So it's great to hear from you. And thank you so much for joining us. So without further ado, I'm going to jump into the first question. We've got some amazing coaches here, and I think it's really important for us to hear from you. So many individuals feel uncomfortable discussing race at work. I come across this all the time. How do I not get it wrong? Can you tell me exactly what to say to get it right? So what are some strategies or tools that you think organizations can implement to create a safe and supportive environment for these conversations? I'll repeat it. What are some tools or strategies organizations can implement to create a safe and supportive environment for these conversations? And I'm going to start with you, Hera.
Right, so that's a very interesting question, Jenny. I think, first of all, you need to gauge how prepared your organization is, because if you've never had these bold conversations before, then you would at least need to lay the groundwork for it. But that also doesn't mean that you wait for too long. You don't have to master readiness before you can dive in, because you can no longer afford to tiptoe around these issues. You can't delay your concern. It's not an option. And empathy should not be outweighing caution. Once you do decide to delve into this, I think step back instead of taking over, because sometimes when we do belong to privileged groups, we might suffer from a savior complex. Let communities speak for themselves. Find out what is it that they would want in this situation. And if you're not qualified, which many of us are not, and that's absolutely fine, then do engage external facilitators who will prepare the conversations in advance, the who, the what, the why, the when, the where. Why are we having this conversation? Who should be invited? Who should be involved? Should this be at all levels? Should this only be for affinity groups first, listening sessions? How many conversations do we need to have? Do we need to build on these conversations? What's the desired outcome? And then finally, I also believe that acknowledge that this is going to be a vulnerable conversation. So validate the emotions, whatever they are, whether they're anger, frustration, or guilt, or hurt. But I read somewhere something which really resonated with me, and they said, offer generosity of interpretation, offer benefit of doubt, because people are not going to get it right the first time. People will be making mistakes, but I think extend them grace, because otherwise people will be too afraid to engage in these conversations. So to create a safe space, you need to be able to make sure that people are vulnerable and are allowed to make mistakes.
Beautiful. I love that. Offer generosity of interpretation. If we could all do that, I think there'll be a lot less in terms of cancel culture, a lot more listening taking place. And maybe we wouldn't be surprised that, sometimes there's a backlash because we would have heard people out in the first place, and that wouldn't necessarily happen. So thank you, Hera. Some wonderful insights. Ishreen?
So I agree with Hera. The first thing to do is really to understand where your organization is. And in that process, there are a number of tools you can use. You can, now, a lot of organizations use the engagement survey, which is great, but the engagement survey is designed for a certain purpose. It's not necessarily designed to help you understand how people are feeling. So, we might think people are feeling uncomfortable, but to what extent are they feeling uncomfortable, and what are they feeling uncomfortable about? So, we help organizations to really craft that survey in a way that it's safe for people to take part. And then, how do you encourage an environment of healthy candor? So we think listening circles are a very powerful way to do that. And in our listening circles, we train people in how to listen, because mostly people are listening to the conversations in their heads. And if you don't help people to really understand what that looks like, it's very difficult for them to go beyond that inner dialogue, which is really about, the typical conversations are, do I agree? Do I disagree? Is she right? Is she wrong? Can I trust her? When you're busy with all those conversations, and ultimately the conversation most people are having in their heads is, how do I look good? How do I avoid looking bad? And behind that is just fear of getting it wrong. So you need to look at what's at the source of that within your organization, within the human beings in your organization. And it won't be the same as other organizations because your culture is unique. So how do you help people to go beyond that inner dialogue to really have what we call healthy candor, to be able to speak up when they agree or when they disagree without the fear of consequences? So we call it already always listening, and we think that's a very powerful tool.
Amazing. Yes, this idea of healthy candor. How can we have these open, honest, respectful conversations with each other? Yeah. And this is all about a new paradigm in the way we work, isn't it? A new way of being. And it's imperative if we're going to move forward. Thank you. Ngozi, what would you like to add?
It helps if I unmute, doesn't it? These are some excellent points, and they all go towards the importance of psychological safety you mentioned, Ishreen, and it's that contract of trust between the employer and the employee. And I think there are some key things that we can do to make sure that that trust is built, maintained, and are not broken. Some of them are on the individual level and some of them are on an organizational level, right? So if I think about, as an organization, what can you do? Well, it is, first of all, stating why you want to have these conversations, making it clear that it's part of a strategy, that you're moving towards anti-racism. This is your intention, publicly declaring it internally, making sure that your policies are in line with that, and that your employees who have struggled because they've been racially marginalized, so this part of the 75%, know that they have the support of the wider organization, and that they will not tolerate people who are not moving in that direction. But then there's the things that you can do at an individual level, as Ishreen and Hira were talking about creating these safe spaces. And when you do that, it helps very much to have people who make you as the individual speaking, whether you are of the global majority or in fact part of the presiding majority in the UK here, the white ethnicity, to have people in your group who look like you, who understand things from your perspective. So can you create those listening spaces that are facilitated by people from each racial demographic? That's something that we do when we're creating our focus groups, listening groups, to as wherever possible, have the facilitator be part of that group, because it aids that comfort and creation of that psychological safety. Can you use your employee resource groups to facilitate that a little bit more? So yeah, there's a lot of things, and and I guess it's also about taking time and patience. I think we touched on it a little bit earlier, being patient, being understanding with it, that you will not always get it right. I also loved what you said about teaching people how to listen. I recently read a quote that was, listen with the same passion with which we wish to be heard. That's what it's all about. So yeah, there are lots of things.
Wonderful. Thank you. We'll go to you, Lisa. What would you like to add?
Just something small in terms of, for all of these things to work, you need your senior leadership team and your management team to take the lead on this. Because if they take the lead on this, then it will actually happen. You need them to be doing the supervision and the regular checks on that. You need to follow up on actions and measure progress. Because if you do that, then you can see that if you're moving in the right direction and what needs to change. If those things are not in place, then having these policies and things that we've just spoken about, the training, it's going to be short-lived. And for those senior leaders, they'll need training, like we've mentioned about listening and other things here, but they need training. Coaching and mentoring support would be good as well, particularly if it is from someone from a diverse background. That can really help, because then they can talk in those sessions confidentially, express themselves and work through situations that they feel uncomfortable with. Because if they feel uncomfortable talking about it, then they're not going to help somebody else feel comfortable talking about it. Another small thing is to have a checklist, and not a checklist as a tick box exercise, but a checklist as prompts and reminders. So when you're in that situation, you just to think about what you could do. So, for example, is it right to say something right now in the moment that could be in front of a lot of people? Or whether it's wait later on and have a one-to-one with someone. So just those things. Think about your relationship with that person. Will they understand where you're coming from? Will they, what sort of relationship do you have? We have different conversations with different people, don't we? And there's certain things we can say to our friends or family members that would understand, and others that wouldn't, because we have a different relationship. So all those sort of things will help in terms of checklists to thinking about before you approach a situation. And do audits, monitor your progress, and remember to celebrate them, because there'll be things that you do achieve, and also communicate honestly the results. So there will always be things that need to be improved and worked on.
Fantastic. Thank you. Given such rich responses, I hope everyone's writing copious notes. I'm going to go back actually to what you said, Hira, because we've had a specific question here. Someone's starting, Jessica is starting an employee resource network at her company, and would love to know if you could elaborate on don't let empathy outweigh caution.
So first of all, I have to say that's a good call out. I actually meant the opposite thing. Do not let caution outweigh empathy, because it was reference to my point where I said that sometimes organizations wait for too long because they feel this is too complex, this is too controversial, this is too sensitive, so we can't talk about it. And I think it's very important for organizations to respond promptly. So what I meant was, do not let caution outweigh empathy. And I've been trying to clarify, but I couldn't write the comments in this particular chat box.
That's perfect. Perfect. I hope that answers and helps, Jessica. So easily done for something to get the wrong way round. So great that we clarified it. So moving on to our second question. Can you share specific examples of successful initiatives or interventions that have effectively challenged racist behaviours and systems within companies? And I think this is so important because sometimes this whole thing feels very theoretical, and people want to know, what can I actually do? What tangible steps? What works? What have you seen in your travels, in your experience? That will be really helpful to help people move forward. So we're going to start with you this time, Ishreen.
Sure. So way back in 2020, right, we were all locked down and they murdered George Floyd. And it's hard to believe that the 4th anniversary is going to be this coming weekend, right? So when that happened, let me say, up to that point, doing this kind of work was like pushing a big boulder up a hill, and it was hard work. The moment that happened, everybody wanted to put things right. And we had a lot of we do a lot of work in the cultural sector and the STEAM sectors. And we had a lot of calls from the clients we work with, the cultural sector, including organizations like Sadler's Wells and the Serpentine, all trying to respond to what had happened, and more so to an organization that called themselves the White Pube. It's, yes, you heard that right. It's a horrible term, but it was deliberately phrased to attack what galleries are known as, which is the white cube, right? So they were challenging the cultural sector organizations, museum, art galleries, theatres, and so forth. And we were called in to support them. And a lot of our whole approach is that you don't do a knee-jerk response. You don't do what just sounds right at the time. And fortunately, our clients agree. So we ended up doing a lot of work helping them to build cultures that were more inclusive, that were more empowering for Black and Brown people. And a lot of that work started with finding out where they were already. So I've mentioned the surveys and the listening circles and focus groups, working with the executives to really try and get where they're at and where they wanted to go, and really tell some truths, and realize that they wanted to hear the voices of Black and Brown people. But where were all those people? Well, they were in the visitors role in galleries, or they were cleaning, or they were setting up stages with, they weren't people who would feel comfortable stepping up and speaking with the CEO and the artistic director. So a lot of our work was then encouraging those people, giving them what they needed to be able to speak up in an executive corporate kind of environment, and giving them a voice, and making sure that the CEO and the senior management teams could hear them. So there was a lot of work we did to help set up the infrastructure, so work at the individual level to increase confidence, clarity, and courage. But also in the institutional level, there were job descriptions going out for recruitment that required a Cambridge degree to be a curator, a junior curator, which was, people realized that was ridiculous. And so they became much more adept at attracting people of color and helping them to succeed through some of the work that we did. So changing the institutional policies and procedures and behaviors and ways of working. But also, what I love about working with the cultural sector is that you can make structural change. So they then started looking at exhibitions and plays and so forth that were really giving a voice to the real issues here. And as they were educated and as they understood, they could actually help to educate the community, because, we talk about equity and inclusion at work, but people who walk through the door to work, they're not just coming into your cultural environment, they're swimming in a sea that's really unfair for them. So being able to influence and almost our target audience, right? The kinds of people who go to theatres and museums and art galleries are the kinds of people who have power, who can impact, and who can do with that kind of education. So I think that's my favorite example. And one of the things about the cultural sector is that they had to also do it in order to earn money, right? So the Arts Council is their main funder, and they put restrictions and requirements around diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging in order to get funding. And so it was really a privilege for us to be able to do that work. And we're now taking that experience out to the wider STEAM sector, the financial services and insurance particularly is impacted with new regulation coming out of the FCA. So really taking that kind of knowledge to benefit other sectors in STEAM.
Thank you. That was such a comprehensive response and really took everyone on that journey with you. Yeah, from the tragic killing of George Floyd to where we are today, how you've been helping. So thank you so much, Ishreen. I'm going to go to Lisa next.
Sorry, I was just trying to get myself off mute. You challenged me there a little bit. Right. Yeah, I suppose there isn't been one organisation that's fully successful, otherwise we wouldn't be having this conversation. But there have been degrees of success in there. And I guess it's what Ishreen was saying in terms of doing it correctly. So we have got from George Floyd in 2020, like we said, we're 4 years in now, and companies did start looking into what is it that I can do? What is it that, how are we treating the people within our organisations that are not white? And how are we addressing that? And these policies and procedures and reports and all sorts of things were put into place. We've had this for years across industries and organisations, and it hasn't changed because it is a spur moment. Something happens, an incident happens, and there's a reaction. And what we need to get out of is not reacting because an inquiry has happened and a report's been written or an incident has happened that's, struck the world. But actually do something because it is the right thing to do, and not just do it for 1 year, 2 years. It's 4 years now since George Floyd, and we can see already new roles that were created are being made redundant or not being filled when people move on. The promises that have been made are no longer a priority or haven't been updated. We've seen initiatives that have not been sustainable, or they're not working because they didn't do the groundwork that Ishreen was allaying to in terms of making their non-white colleagues feel that they belong and they can thrive in the environment they're working in. We need more than intent. Intent doesn't measure success. Good intentions, statements and promises have no impact if we don't do the relevant action and give the ongoing support. So I think that's really important that we have that relevant action and the ongoing support and not take shortcuts. If we have to do the background research, to have those discussions, do the listening circles, get the data, and then put something in place that's sustainable, those things will actually then change the environment and the organisational culture long term and not just short term.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. If you had a mic, I'd encourage you to drop it because that was very, very inspiring. And absolutely, I was completely agreeing with every single comment you made there. So thank you so much, Lisa, for adding your thoughts. I'll go to Hira next.
Thank you, Jenny. So I did look up specific examples because I was recently a judge at this Race Equality Forum. So I'm not at liberty to share the names of the organization, but some of the few examples which I saw, I was particularly quite impressed by, was an updated unacceptable customer behavior policy, which was strengthening guidance for managers on what to do to support staff and address inappropriate customer behavior or inappropriate behavior from external suppliers. And they added identity-based harm, including racism, as a risk factor in loan working risk assessments, which meant that managers were expected to have a conversation with Asian, Black, and other ethnically diverse staff about the risk of experiencing racism, and then also offering them support like potential safeguards and measures such as personal protective equipment, recording devices, choice over who to work with, because they felt that it was important to have a zero tolerance approach to racism, not just internally, but externally as well. So I thought that was quite interesting because sometimes you're not able to extend the same thing to the suppliers and customers. And they developed anti-racism web pages. I know Pamela had a question and she was saying that they had a public intent, but there were no resources within the organization, which I think is so important. You need to offer resources to support and guide managers through discussing anti-racism in team meetings and supervisions. And they also, what they did was they redesigned staff name badges to include an optional phonetic spelling of their name. So because a lot of people were complaining about how their names were shortened. And finally, Jenny, I'm a huge fan of allyship programs. I think I was speaking to somebody last week and they said it was rather unfortunate. Somebody made an inappropriate comment and that was referred to HR and EDI because the manager was not well equipped to address it himself. So I feel it's so important to, make managers understand how do you call out, or if you prefer to say call in, because that removes the blame and shame, but offering them the strategies and the tools to address this kind of behavior is so important. And then also dividing the responsibility. It shouldn't be the responsibility of one single person calling it out each time. Someone I know, they actually divide the responsibility between 3 to 4 people. And that was quite encouraging, because not one person didn't feel, because it sometimes can be exhausting, right, being the only one calling it out. So they rotated the responsibility. So some of the examples that I came across.
Love those very practical examples, what they actually look like, what people might not have considered. And some of these are really easy to implement. Phonetic spelling of names. These things are not difficult to do. Giving people a choice of who to work with. In large organizations, that's not so difficult. So thank you for giving some really practical examples of really great practice. Ngozi.
Yeah, there's some brilliant examples, and I just wanted to say I absolutely feel and share Lisa's frustration on where we are today. I mean, it seems to be the backlash to the Black Lives Matter progress that was made. We're now in the age where Esther McVeigh is cancelling DEI specific roles within the civil service. And Elon Musk has no problem stating publicly that he believes DEI must die. So we're in a really difficult spot for those of us who are passionate about racial equity and justice. So to put it in a more positive way, this morning I found myself binge watching the final episodes of the first half of Bridgerton on Netflix, right? And anyone who's seen Bridgerton will understand why I've selected Netflix as a shining example of a company that is truly putting the intention into action, right? And they have done some amazing things. And it starts with actually that intention. They have a very clear reason why they have to focus on racial equity and justice. They know that if they want to make the organization as successful as possible, they need to put out stories that captivate the imagination and relate to as many different people as possible in order to be successful, right? That's how they'll win that market. And in order for them to make those stories, they need writers from as many different demographic backgrounds as possible. If they need writers from lots of different demographic backgrounds, then they need admin staff from different backgrounds, etc., etc. So they're really clear that being racially equitable is not just a knee-jerk response to BLM. It's actually the way that we win market share, that we deliver value to our customers, and we stay on top. Fantastic. And from there, they put it into practice. They have been looking at their whole business strategy through an inclusion lens. That's what they call it, an inclusion lens. And it starts with recruitment. So they've got a dedicated director of inclusion recruiting who guides the inclusion programs for recruiting, including employee training and use of inclusive hiring practices. And as a result, they have successfully achieved the following. They've got women make up half of Netflix workforce. They've got half of Netflix's US workforce and leadership at direct level and above are from one or more underrepresented races or ethnic backgrounds. And in the last 3 years, the number of Black employees in the US doubled to 8% of the workforce and 9% of the leadership. And they don't just stop there. They actively listen and respond to employee feedback. They invest in inclusive hiring practices, increase diversity, and think outside the box when it comes to where they're going to source their diverse talent. So many times I hear people say, oh, we'd love to recruit more Black and brown leaders in our business, but we can't find them. And I think, well, then you're not looking. They invest in targeted training and support and access for marginalized and underrepresented peoples. They ensure that equitable pay and benefits is part of their inclusion strategy. And they know that they have to niche their solutions down. So what works for one group does not necessarily work for another. So they have employee resource groups that are specific for each ethnic minority group represented. And they've still got stuff to do. And yes, your organization may not have the budgets that Netflix have, but what it can take from this is that starting with that right intention, doing it for a clear reason that isn't in response to whatever the whims of politics or popular culture are, so that you can make sure that you will resource this right in terms of people, in terms of finance, and that you're in it for the long term. And then you can start looking at the entire colleague journey from recruitment to retirement.
Wonderful, wonderful. I just want to say we are open to other streaming companies. We're not being sponsored here. But if you don't get a free account after that, well, there's a problem.
I'm telling you.
No, absolutely great. Thank you so much for sharing with us what best practice can look like, and I completely agree. Yeah, there's so much that I've learned actually through engaging with Netflix, which is just amazing, that I would never have known about previously. And it's educational, and it's great that they're not just ticking a box. They're actually doing their very best to embed it. Two things I want to say about what we've said so far, that I know we're saying it shouldn't have to happen, that George Floyd was killed in order to ignite action. But there is quite a lot of research which says interest conversion has to happen. There has to be something that makes the majority group, makes this really matter to the majority group as well as the minoritized group for action to take place. And that was a moment that did that. I think it's almost about sustaining the momentum that we've built and keeping in mind what connected us at that point. But I do think there has to be something that connects us to make this important for both groups. And it should just be, this is the right thing to do. But I think sometimes we do need an anchor point, is my perspective. And I also just wanted to share an example of some of the work that we've been doing with Citizens Advice, who have got a brilliant anti-racist strategy, but then have worked to bring it to life. And they've really taken an intersectional lens on it as well. So even though we might be thinking about people from Black, Asian, minority ethnic backgrounds, the global majority, they then sort of looked, and what else? Is it women of color? Is it people from the global majority with a disability? Is it neurodivergence? And what do we do to support this group? But not only them, we know it's never about the group. In fact, when they're not confident enough or they're not advancing, it's never about them. It's about the system that they're part of. So therefore, what do their line managers need? What do their sponsors need? And everyone going through something together, and so that everyone is developed as part of this process. Because what we know is that when you're trying to create an anti-racist culture, if you put all the pressure on the people who are the victims, who are subjected to the racism to solve the problem, that isn't fair. And that isn't where all the resource needs to go. So I think that's just always something to consider. I know that, Lisa, you touched on Pamela's question, but I just want, and I think Kira did as well, I just want us to see if we can help in any way. When organized offer an organizational declaration of intent, but do not provide the resources internally to support the delivery of long-term delivery, what should happen? What could we do? Because we've just talked about some really great best practice, but what happens if actually you're feeling that your organization is formative or hasn't thought it through? Any thoughts from you?
Yeah.
I think,
That famous, I could have a pound for. If I could have a pound for every time I've been in a room where a CFO or a CEO or a C something O has stood up and said, we're going to have 50% women on the board, or we're going to have 25% Black people on the board. If I could have a pound, right? Now, look, that happens. And what I usually see is the head of the ERG, the D&I director, and the people who have to deliver this, like you can see their jaws drop, their faces drop there. And what often happens is that people get tired of trying to do that in their organization, and they go to another organization thinking it would be better. And the truth is, it's usually not. So all you're doing if you move from one job to another is letting the situation continue. I guess if you're asking for advice, I guess the thing is really, how can you have the courage to have that honest candor and speak up? And it might have a negative impact on your career, and that's what mostly we're afraid of. But usually I've found that people listen, and then you can at least educate that person not to make those kinds of statements anymore, because actually the organizations, you might look good for 30 seconds, but the organization's going to end up looking really bad because you won't deliver on the promise, right? And you can start to put some, this is a systemic and institutional thing. So think about how you get the message up to your sponsors of your ERGs, etc., before the events. It's almost like a pre-briefing, because they'll appreciate it in the end.
Thank you so much. I think Lisa wanted to say something.
Yeah, it's making sure that you're able to speak to those that have actually got the power and the authority to make change. There's no point talking to people. Well, there's not no point, because it's releasing talking to people about your frustration, but they can't make the change. So you need to be able to get to those people that have the power to make the change and speak to them about it. And that might be a one-to-one, or it might be that you get a collective of thoughts and ideas, or whatever it is that you're putting together, and present it to them. Again, saying the impact that it's having on the organization, the impact that it's having on the individuals. And that way you're actually talking with facts as well as what's actually happening in the organization, which they're concerned about because they want their organization to grow and thrive.
Brilliant. Yeah. Great. Yeah, I completely agree. I would add, what about case studies from other organizations? Speaking to other people and ask, what have they done, and how much have they spent, so that you come with a place of, this is typically how much it costs to do what we need to do. And that evidence is really helpful. And I think also the cost of not getting it right, the cost of, but like Lisa was saying, the bad reputation that could come from it, but also the cost of not retaining your staff. So the cost of having to re-recruit people, etc. So thinking about all of the costs that are associated with not investing could be another way to go into that as well. Thank you. The time has gone really quickly today, so I'm going to go to our final question. If you have any questions, please do put them into the chat straight away, so that we can make sure we get to them by the end, because we haven't got long left. So my final question is, building an anti-racist corporate culture requires ongoing commitment and effort. What are some key indicators or metrics that organizations can track to measure their progress and hold themselves accountable on the journey? And I'm going to ask you all, to give reasonably brief answers. Cut a minute or so, max, would be really brilliant. I'm going to start with you, Ngozi.
Yeah, it's so important that we measure it. Peter Drucker said, if you don't measure it, then you can't improve it. So you have to think again that the recruitment to retirement cycle. And I think the easiest way for organizations to do this is to just use Netflix's inclusion lens on all the metrics that they gather. So what are the demographic details, as granular as you can get them, for all of the following, like your hiring and your recruitment, your employee demographics generally, your retention and attrition rates, your customer satisfaction rates, or your engagement scores? Do you have the breakdown for each demographic, so that you can see whether it's a general 65% happiness, or 3 out of 5, or however you grade it, or is it limited to certain ethnic demographics? What's your pay equity like? What's your leadership like? The shocking few number of CEOs who can answer what the racial demographic split is at board level or above. Very few can say with confidence that it matches anywhere close to the demographic makeup of this society that we live in. So just use that inclusion lens in all the demographics, or the metrics, that you gather, and start to get as much level of granularity as you can. The trick is being able to get that demographic split, because often employees from marginalized backgrounds are reluctant to share demographic data that's sensitive to them, because they haven't built that psychological safety. So you're going to have to work and be patient at it, and prove that you want to use it for good intentions.
Great points. Really good examples of all the sorts of data that we can track. Thank you. And if you're in a public sector organization, it might be much easier, in fact. So you might find that all the data is available to you, which would be really helpful. Ishreen, over to you.
Thank you, Jenny. So a lot of organizations I go into show off their engagement scores. Right. And isn't it wonderful that 80% of our people experience being included? Well, sure, but probably 80%, a large part of that group are in the majority. Right. So where you want to look, if you're looking at metrics, is in the lesser scores. So what are the 20% doing? What is it that makes them not feel included? So I guess that's the first lesson I would say, is be really careful around your metrics. And I would say metrics need to look not just at the commercial aspects, but also the social purpose aspects. And there's an example that I really love from Procter & Gamble. And it's where a lady who worked in their IT unit had a conversation with a senior person in the organization, who asked her, what are you really passionate about? And this lady's blind. And she said, you know what, I'd love to increase access. There are many people out there who buy Persil or who buy our products who are blind, and they see these, or they are presented with, because they can't see, they're presented with these adverts, and it makes no sense to them. And she referred to the Flash ad, which you may remember, with the Queen song, and of the visual is of a muddy dog who sprays mud all over the place, and then the owner of the house cleans using Flash, and it looks beautiful and sparkly. And for someone who can't see, that means very little. And so one of the initiatives she's put in place is having those audio cues, so that there's a description of the ad. And this is something they're working on. And not only is it great for the consumers, because you're also doing something for the business, because you're opening up a whole new market that you couldn't sell to before. Right?
Great. Yeah. Fantastic example. Thank you. Lisa?
The monitoring tracking that was just been mentioned before, a good one to do is complaints and compliments, whether they're internal and external, looking at that, overlapping it with other data, especially if it regarding an individual, because then you might see a correlation if there's something happening in your review process, disciplinary process, and a complaint coming in from the public or something else, you can see that there might be things there. Examine disparities remind amongst ethnic minorities or majorities, or global majorities, I should say. Make sure that you can see what sort of positions they're in, what type of projects that they're being assigned to work on, what opportunities are they being given, and seeing if there's a disparity there as well. So it's not just that you've got people in place, bodies there, that actually, are they being embedded, are they being belonging, how they get in the opportunity. And do staff surveys. A lot of people do that already, organisations, but collecting that quantitative and qualitative data gives a rounder picture about what's going on within the organisation and how they're feeling. And it also drives public confidence and partners and customer confidence if you share that information on your website and make it freely available, and that holds you to account as well.
Brilliant. And last but not least, you're having the last word, Hira. What would you like to add?
So definitely excellent points made by everybody. I don't think I can add much, but I would say to Gozi's point that you need to disaggregate the data, because sometimes even within pay disparity, you might see that certain communities are much more affected than the rest. So rather than collecting cumulative data which says, all Black employees or brown employees are paid less, just really get into the demographics. And again, I think it's so important also to have regular surveys, collect feedback from employees every now and then, anonymous feedback, focus groups, suggestion boxes, because sometimes the measures can be misleading. How do they actually feel safe? And all this that you're looking at, how does it have an impact on the psychological safety of the organization? Because we all know that it all depends on senior leaders, and whatever you're willing to tolerate, the worst behavior which you're willing to tolerate is the behavior which is going to continue. So also having a look at how the senior leaders particularly are responding and being vulnerable to accepting any mistakes and doing better.
Thank you so much, Hira, and thank you so much to Ngozi, Lisa, and Ishreen. You were all amazing. You provided so many insights, which I hope our audience found helpful. I think that LinkedIn Live was a little bit glitchy today. It didn't have the accurate number of how many people joined us, but I want to say thank you so much to each and every one of you that did join us today. Thank you for your questions. Thanks for your participation. It's been amazing. To find out more about Hira, Ngozi, Lisa, and Ishreen, and how you can engage with them, do look them up in the Diverse Executive Coach Directory, a directory which connects corporate organizations with coaches from the global majority. My colleague Tanya will add the link to the chat and also a link to our LinkedIn page. Our next event is Diagnosing the Support Needed to Achieve, and sorry, that's not our next event. Our next event is Inclusive Recruitment Strategies, Expanding Your Talent Pool for Lasting Success. So it's all about inclusive recruiting. What I was talking about is we do have a download for you, which is a Diagnosing Support Needed to Achieve an Inclusive Environment, which will help you on your journey to anti-racism. So we will add a link to the checklist in the chat too. And to find out more about me and the work I do, please go to Jenny Garrett Global. There you'll find a link to sign up for my newsletter. And you can also find out more about my book, Equality versus Equity. And the very last ask, please do take a minute to let us know what you thought about today's webinar. We do have a survey that you can complete. Thank you so much. Again, just a huge thank you for you sharing your wisdom, actually, Lisa, Ishreen, Ngozi, and Hira. There was so much there. I think you know that you've just touched the surface of their knowledge. There's a huge iceberg below the surface that we haven't been able to get to during this session. Do connect with them, do follow them. They've got such a wealth of information to share, and perhaps you'll want to work with them in the future. So thank you so much. Take care, everyone, and see you for our next month's webinar on inclusive recruitment. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.